Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
So welcome everybody to this special edition of Burgess and Bolton. As I said last week, this is the second of a two-part interview with David Law and Katrina Salmon from Savills, taking an in-depth look at the future of the office and office working. If you missed last week's episode, part one of the interview, then you probably want to go back, have a look on the website and just download and watch that. Feel free to watch this one now, but to put it in context, you'll probably need to see part one. Ben, you got a bit about what's going to be covered?
Yeah, so this is obviously a continuation, as you say, of last week's interview. I think this is incredibly interesting. It's another sequel that works as well, if not better, than the first part. A couple of things, really, I just kind of want to touch on before we let Katrina and David talk. But the first is David talking about social space and how that's specifically changing in with reference to examples in the EC3 market and how agile working has actually panned out in reality. So I think that's incredibly relevant to how we will all be working, I suspect, in the future. The next is Katrina giving a really interesting explanation of the differences between flexible and agile working, which I hadn't really fully grasped before this. And that is really good. About agile is about where you work and flexible is about when you work. And then the final part of the interview, which, as I think we said last week, is very positive and actually, a real kind of light at the end of the tunnel moment, is all about the focus on how the Lloyd's market and broking and underwriting, and they see those changes. And I think that, we do end on a really positive note in this one. So enjoy.
Great. Thanks, Ben. And so this is part two of our interview with David and Katrina from Savills. I think there's one thing as well to add on that point before we move on, is that, one of the successes of work from home, if you like, the reason it has been a success is that everybody knows everybody else. So everyone used to work in an office, now they're working from home. So we all know each other. We know what our traits are, what we're like in meetings, and that kind of, in the medium term, that starts to fall away as people, resign, or you're trying to bring new people in. As Ben was saying, how do you learn a job if you can't see someone else doing the job on a day-to-day basis? Pick up on those formal, informal, rules or whatever within an office environment. It's just, I just can't see, to your point, David, I just cannot see it working long term for so many reasons.
I mean, we have a vested interest in it not working, so we want everyone back in the office, of course.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
But no, the reporting we've been doing over lockdown is largely to CFOs, and they want to see that. If you can put 20% of your staff back home through the year, then shouldn't you be able to trim 20% of your footprint? But as Katrina will know better than anyone, when we were all looking at agile working over the last sort of 5 years, and the brief comes in, we're going to go agile, therefore we want 25% less space. Invariably, the output from the design team was that it's not possible to shrink the office, because you need to put back so much more social space when you create these non-defined desks areas that you have to have somewhere else to go and meet as a team, or project areas. And it was very interesting, wasn't it, with all the the CFOs who were expecting this to throw off big savings. It just didn't, and quite often the space got bigger. So again, I'm not sure you're, particularly with social distancing, you're actually, we're going to be able to achieve the savings that people would expect from this work from home experiment we've gone through. It's again, that's another challenge that I just don't see coming through.
So what do you see, David, as those practicalities? We've talked about this before, haven't we? That actually for those city HQs, they're very large workforces, and I think in kind of smaller businesses, but can they manage that? Is that very doable now?
I mean, the thing everyone's focused on at the moment is lifts. and
Yeah.
high rise. It's a real issue. Walkie-talkie, Leadenhall are going to struggle, I think, over that. That September, if there is some sort of rush back in September and those two buildings fill up, and unless we move very rapidly towards some sort of vaccine, I think that they're going to have to stagger the way times you come into a building. That morning, lunchtime, evening rush is a disaster when you can only get half your lifts full or less. So the high-rise buildings are going to be challenging. There aren't actually that many high-rise in EC3. And in fact, if you compare it to New York, they're all low-rise, but those two are relatively high-rise. The other buildings, Plantation and St. Botolph's and Tower Place, where the big brokers sit, they're sort of 10-story buildings. So I think that the physical challenges will be worked around, but you will have to see some sort of logistical entry into buildings to ease. If we went up to full capacity, everyone back in, the lifts are going to be challenging. There's talk about changing fresh air into offices, but the other one is, of course, mass transit and the tube. Trains, I take the train up and it's fine because there's hardly anyone on it. And colleagues who use the tube, it's again, pick the time and it's okay. But if we're all back in the city and the West End, the tube, if it's anything like normal, that's got to be a challenge to get people in safely.
Something that I read said that there may well be changes to the whole working pattern, so that you eventually now move away from this rush hour idea. You get people working on a more flexible, fluid basis. Is that anything that you're seeing?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've been advocating this for a long time, that the sort of HR policies should be ripped up. A sort of Monday to Friday 9 to 5 should be ripped up anyway. In fact, I think I first moved to that 2006, so a long time ago, when it wasn't really understood. And I think what we've tried to do is, it's funny because you talk about pre-COVID, as David talked about the market, and before it was all about, do you have an office or a desk, and maybe you can move around a little bit. And most people kicked back on that, even though we did try. Now everything is about, is it agile or flexible? And I think what's really important is to make sure that people understand the differences. And the difference really is being agile is where. The word is where you work. And that means if you're agile, you have a propensity to work either part-time in the office or part-time at home or part-time in these third spaces that we're looking at in sort of the fringe cities. Flexible working is about when you work. And flexible working is to do with your contract that you've actually signed, because most people have signed a contract that says I'm office-based and my general office hours are blah, blah, blah. And I think that's where we're going to have to be looking contractually in the HR world. But that's about when you work. So it does mean that you can stagger it, and we should be staggering it, because we've been long proponents that buildings are designed, as architects and working in the development world, we design buildings with infrastructure for 7 days a week. The fact that we don't use it 2 days a week doesn't mean that the air conditioning isn't there, the lights aren't there, the heating isn't there. And so to be able to use all of this energy and safely is that we should be looking for 24/7 solution to the buildings that we're paying all this money for. And so if you add in a flexible opportunities as far as when you come in, so you can stagger the rush hour early. I have people in my office now, someone comes in at 6:30 in the morning and he leaves at 4, vice versa. Someone comes in at 10:30 and leaves at 7. So there's all kinds of ways to do it. Yeah. What I think the success though is you have to have a core hours where you're together, because the whole point of coming to an office today is to be together. Yeah. Otherwise you might as well be at home. So you have to find that solution where we're trying to do that in our own office. And I said to people, and the average on our report shows that people want to work anywhere from 2 or 3 days a week, which is roughly half time at home, which by default means half time in the office. And so it's looking at those opportunities to have, say, one consistent day where everybody is in together, and then have core hours that says you can flex either side some magic core of, we're looking at a core of 4 or 5 hours at the moment. That's core, and then you work other side around it. But I think the terms flexible and agile have to be understood as agile is where, flexible is when.
Yeah.
Which is tricky with the Lloyd's market because, those underwriting patterns are very much timed through the day, and it tends to be before and after lunch, doesn't it? But that does require a sort of 9 to 5 existence, and it'd be interesting to see whether Lloyd's would
funny enough,
what
David,
they're doing.
One of the things that the brokers were saying through the research is that changed actually with COVID. So what actually brokers were talking about was saying they were starting to judge who they were dealing with and when they would deal with them. So they said if we dealt with a young underwriter who kind of lived in Fulham somewhere with a young baby and small place or children, they would say we'd kind of avoid them in the early morning, and then they deal with more senior people. So they naturally, the people started to naturally work out different ways of working, and brokers, I think, were just better at this and got it. And they also talked about things like saying, well, when we try and it's really hard to get hold of underwriters if they want to avoid us in this scenario. So they were saying, well, they use things like Instagram and things and WhatsApp to sort of catch them off guard and then say, where the hell are you? Get that deal done. So it's one of the things I've noticed, and I don't know whether you've seen, is this very rule-bound industry, insurance, has sort of through the initial parts of COVID and beyond, has had to sort of throw off a lot of those rules and just trust people to do the job. And they've done it rather well, I think.
Yeah. You've just hit on the one word that's going to make a success out of COVID-19 is trust. People say to me still, well, how do I think it was okay for 4 months, but I'm not sure they're really working. And I said, it's about trust. You're going to get the most productivity. We already know that productivity hasn't suffered in remote working, but we do know statistically that it's in the UK, it's added 2 hours to your average day, and in the US, 3 hours to their average day. And that's a report by Bloomberg. But trust and empathy are going to be the differentiators of the employer of choice, and creativity is the new productivity going forward.
And by inference there, Katrina, you're saying that talent will go to the places where there is trust and these flexible ways of working.
Without a doubt. I mean, there's a short term, I need to keep my job. I have to find what I can. So we're talking short term now, 12 months. Yeah. The economy is where it is. But absolutely, if there was a level playing field, employees won't stand for employers that dictate things anymore. It's going to have to be a give and take, without a shadow of a doubt. And going back to your comment about the hours, what we found when we were interviewing the underwriters is that they typically would come in the office from, say, 9 to 10. They'd bag a seat, they'd put their coat down, their jacket, they'd show everybody, hi, I'm here. Then they sort of go away from 10 to 4, between being in the box, having lunch, going back to the box, and then they'd show up again at sort of 4:30. Yeah. Hi, I've done my day's work, but they were kind of marking time or marking their place.
Yeah.
Now that's all gone.
Yeah.
And so if you replace that with trust, productivity, creativity, empathy, and that's out the window, because you could be in the box next door, you could be working from home because nobody really matters anymore. Then you are able to alter those hours. And if you need to be doing, underwriting or at Lloyd's or something at 10, there's no reason you need to start at 9 because you're not having to bag a desk, because you probably aren't going to get a desk anyway. Yeah.
One thing, David, I wanted to ask you about was we do we're nominating lots of research studies here, aren't we? Which is great. But anyway, we do a research study which we eventually renamed Trading Spaces, which was really a study about the broker experience in reception areas and things. And David and I talked about that, and it was we were kind of rating it on various things. And those spaces were pre-COVID were really kind of developing well, I thought, in certain places. And I just wanted to ask you about how you think that will go versus, say, the Lloyd's Room and in some of these new buildings like 22 Bishopsgate and so on.
Yeah, the evolution of the broker lounge. I mean, it sort of kicked off with Hitchcock's Art Cafe, I think, was the first one I saw, and then Ace did theirs on 100 Leadenhall, and then we did loads in 24 Fenchurch Street when everyone moved in there. And it was the quality of the coffin, the coffee, the muffin, and then sweets coming out your ears, and every sort of food you could have. And I mean, Brit's arrangement in Leadenhall is incredible with the staff who it's like a hotel. The future on that. I mean, I sense a lot of our underwriting clients would love to take box space out of Lloyd's and do more business in their office. If you take COVID out of the picture for the moment and just talk about how their ideal would be, I mean, box space is expensive, and they love to capture the brokers in their space. So I suspect that trend will continue. It probably won't be. I've always thought it just and talking to the brokers, it was very interesting when Amlin moved into the Leadenhall building. They were slightly concerned about sitting above Aon in the Aon Tower, and would Marsh come and see them JLT when they were independent, and so we were commissioned to go and interview all the brokers about what they wanted when they came in to see Amlin, and most of them just wanted a quick lift ride to get to the underwriter they wanted to see, and get out again having done the business. Not one of them mentioned the coffee beans they were being served, or how comfy the furniture was. It was just the efficiency there, because they just want to do their job, make some money, and they've got a lot of people to see in the day to get that risk on placement. So I think it will probably be a more efficient IT system, and particularly if Lloyd's goes more, is obviously digitalizing itself. So it will have to be around IT. I think it will have to be around business efficiency in the most comfortable manner it can be achieved. I mean, Katrina did the Axis fit out in Scalpel, so I imagine
that's really
Thank you.
And you got the first floor in there, which WR Berkeley were going to have that as a communal.
They were going to have that, and I said to Mark Gregory, the CEO, I said, the only way this deal will work is not to take levels 2, 3, and 4, but you must take 1, 2, and 3, and you use the escalator that was put in, and that's the only way it's going to work. We also advised on Aon. We put in that extra escalator, so they were able to go in on level 1 and bypass the level 2 main reception. But it's been hugely successful for Access to have that in and out quickly.
I think there's some really quite interesting and different broker spaces that all seem to work really well, and they evolve over time. That's what I've noticed. I mean, your point, David, is absolutely right. The research we've done shows that what the brokers love is to be able to do some work in between meetings. So if they've got Wi-Fi and a cup of coffee, they don't really mind what the coffee is, but it's all about getting the job done, but in a kind of reasonably pleasant way. And in a way, it's like a bit like the kind of work from home thing. The flexibility of it is really key to all of this, isn't it?
Yeah. And I also, the broking office, we did the Hyperion fit out in Creechurch, and we spent years with David Howden trying to design the perfect broking environment. And, it is spectacular space. Yeah. And it was all around that central staircase, just trying to get people to move amongst each other and collaborate. I don't know if you say it was a competitor of Katrina's who did the design, so she probably thinks it's awful, but it's... I mean,
I should go and see it.
Yeah, it's quite.
I don't bother Katrina. Terrible.
But these are sort of the highest end spaces that you see in London. Which when I started doing this, the insurance market occupied dreadful buildings.
It was dreadful.
The offices were
awful. Yeah.
And it's incredible how they've pulled their socks up in that sort of 30-year span. They are some of the best spaces possibly in the world.
I would agree.
London is just as good as anywhere else.
I mean, if you go to New York or Manhattan and go to some of the insurers there, it's like, you see the security guard and you feel like you're going into a government public sector building. It's awful. The brand takeout is zero. Research that we did we look at Lloyd's Room and the broker spaces. There's no brand takeout at all from the experience of a broker at the box. They don't even remember who they've been to. They've just done the deals. But when you go to when you look at the correlations between visiting an office and, doing a deal in a broker lounge, that's very different. They remember the place, they've met other people. And one that I was going to mention is the Liberty setup, which I think is really good, and that's one that's really evolved. And it's that big space where people crisscross, and then I go in as a consultant, and it's great because you just meet all sorts of people, some of whom you haven't seen for 6 months. And someone said in an article I read, it's that business is really all about chance meetings. It's not all the ones you expect. It's those chance ones. Oh, I'd forgotten about you, and now I've got an idea of something.
Well, that's what I was talking to one of my senior colleagues about coming back to the office, and she felt that she was very productive, and she was, because she had constant, Zoom or Teams meetings, and she was able to reach her team whenever she needed to have a team meeting. But I said, those are all planned meetings, planned workshops. I said, it's like the buildings, the spaces in between. It's those unplanned scenarios or the spaces between buildings that actually are the most important, that sometimes you can be missing out on.
Yeah, and that's something that we've talked about as well, isn't it, Ben? It's the thing about this work from home is that it's just back-to-back meetings.
Yeah.
Each meeting has got an agenda. You tick them all off and you go, right, okay, thanks very much, goodbye. And there isn't that walk back to the lift where you go, that resonates with something that something there, and the ideas come, and it's very, and like you said, Ben, at the beginning of the interview, it's just intensely tiring to do it back to back to back without having the break, without having the coffee, in the lounge or whatever, or just doing something else.
And then having to do webinars in the evening as well on top.
Well, it's interesting though. This is actually relatively civil. We've got now the opportunity, having joined Savills, to be presenting our research to India, to Kuala Lumpur. I do in the morning, Asia in the morning, and then I've got the evening tomorrow night to the US.
Yeah.
So everybody's interested in the subject on a global basis, and Savills has certainly given us that profile to do it. But everybody is looking. Actually, at the research that we've done, it's been wonderfully received, and I think because the UK tends to lead also on innovation, and we found from a design perspective, definitely we lead on innovation along with a few other countries, but nowhere near like what the US is pretty much stagnant at the moment. So hopefully it will be able to embrace a lot of the good things that have come out of this.
Yeah, just to comment on that, we found that just doing research that does seem to be more flexibility in the ways of working and contacting people, communicating with people in the UK, for example, versus the US, where it's almost like a switch off. It's quite strange, and I don't know how they service customers or clients on that basis. It's really hard to understand, but they seem to have almost triaged everything through single points of contact. It's a kind of really poor way of working, I think, that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to, this has been great, and we probably should wrap in a second because there's so much content here, but I just wanted to finish off because we started in quite a dark place of no knowledge, but actually as this conversation is going on, I feel like our energy is upped and we can see all sorts of opportunities as we probably should. But maybe you could talk a bit about the opportunities as you see them, if you do see those opportunities, because I actually personally feel for my business there are lots of opportunities. But
I mean, well, just from a market perspective, there will be a bit more choice around. I'd say before COVID, it was a very, very tight market, so there will be more choice. I think rents will come down. Savills are trying to crystal ball gaze where that figure might be. It's very difficult, but space is going to get a little bit cheaper, which is a good thing for occupiers. And there is a huge amount of opportunity. I hope that we do come out of this with a more efficient way of working, where 9 to 5 is just gone. And if we can find the systems and the ways to get in and out of buildings, it would be it's just going to be a nicer way to do business, I think, in the future.
Yeah, I think I'm really excited because everything, as I said before, that we've been trying to get across is happening. So it's a wonderful opportunity time for design, for innovation, for creativity. And in the UK, we have a wonderful opportunity to set ourselves apart. And what's really exciting, it's all about the human touch again. I think people were starting to get suckered in by AI and everything was going to be done by robots. And I'm not saying it's not going to, but we've all realized the value of the human touch and caring about people and just seeing the whites of their eyes. And I think you can become so savvy on a Zoom call by switching the camera off or saying, I've got to go, and you have no control. Whereas if you're talking to somebody, you really can have those conversations. So I'm really excited about the future. The future of the office as well.
I had a Zoom call early in lockdown with a very well-known senior broker, and he came up on the video, and I said, "Oh, that's a good one." He said, "What do you mean, David?" I said, "Your backdrop. I love the setting. You can set palm trees and whatever." And he looked out the window and opened the window, and it was his actual view. And then I said, "Oh my God,
I know.
Where do you live? It's fantastic." And he said, "Yeah, do you like the boat?" And there was this massive boat in the background. That was his as well.
I must add to that. I mean, I felt very impoverished at some of the conversations I've had with some of the senior people in the market. I must say, as I've looked at their backdrops, it's quite. I need to get back to an office. The neutrality of that is fine for me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Well, thanks ever so much again for joining us. Brilliant insights into the future of work and office space and talent and flexibility. So just thanks ever so much for taking the time to speak to us today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so that was the second part of our two-part interview with Katrina and David from Savills. A really fascinating insight into the world of property and the future of the office.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I'd just like to add my thanks. I think that was just a brilliant couple of interviews. So much to talk about as we go forward. We're going to be running a second session on this as people actually go back to work or already do start to go back to work on the 11th of September, where we're just going to have some guests, I think, and review some of the issues that have come up. And get some people from the market, I think, to comment. So that'll be interesting. I just want to remind again just about the two reports that are referred to throughout the interview. So the first is Time to Transform, KKS Savills report, and it's all about workplace post-COVID. And then the wider report about office changes in general, which I touched on within the interview. The interviews is Savills Office Fit, and that's all about the need for the office to change and how, obviously, has been discussed, that's accelerating.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to David and Katrina once more for their insights and input, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Burgess and Bolton's Weekly Wrap-Up.